You do your own stunts?
Oh, yeah. Were you not aware of that?
Starring everybody's favourite action figure brought to life, Tiny Tom Cruise, today we'll be doing a Blu-ray collection overview and film discussion, looking at every single Mission Impossible movie. There are 8 movies in total, including the newly released Final Reckoning. Is this really the end of the beloved action franchise? It's crazy how long the name Mission Impossible has been going, and not just with the films. Tom Cruise was a big fan of the original TV series, and since then, I feel the movies have gained their own reputation. Nearly 30 years of The Run, being betrayed by some rich asshole, all whilst defying gravity more times than Wile E. Coyote. I've had mixed feelings on the franchise over the years, especially towards the earlier films, but I do feel these films have improved on themselves over time. Anyway, let's delve into each film as we rank the entire franchise. Starting off with the contents of the Extreme Blu-ray Trilogy box set, we have the first 3 Mission Impossible movies. Admittedly, I did have quite the love-hate relationship with the first 3 films.
It's a lot better than these crappy things.
But opinions do change over time. Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible is where it all began for Ethan Hunt. It's a gritty but slightly dated first step where Windows 95 is the world's best operating system. And closely following in the footsteps of the original TV series, I like how this film takes advantage of the established character Jim Phelps. We're quickly introduced to Ethan Hunt, portrayed by Tom Cruise, a skilled agent who becomes the target of a mole hunt within the IMF organization. And compared to the exaggerated sequels, this film feels more grounded and mostly holds up in terms of the story. I'd say the writing is arguably the film's biggest strength by setting the bar pretty high, where Ethan Hunt's entire team is killed off during a mission set in Prague in the opening sequence, and I was surprised to see Jim Phelps supposedly killed off during this moment. Ethan is then to blame, being the lone survivor and therefore branded as the mole and now a killer, and so he goes on the run to clear his name using the bare minimum amount of resources available. To catch the spy, he needs to acquire a list from the CIA which is securely held in a vault, and assisting him with the heist is hacker Lou Fersteckel, played by Ving Rhames, who would go on to feature in every film surprisingly, and then we have Franz Krieger, played by Gene Renner, who is an integral part of the film in relation to the deaths of Hunt's original team, a traitor who is also terrified of rats. The vault heist sequence is very imaginative and arguably the best part of the film. The deathly silence makes for some thrilling edge-of-your-seat moments, and this sequence has some hilarious behind-the-scenes info about Tom struggling with weight distribution when held in the air, so he filled his shoes with coins to make his legs heavier to stop him tipping forward. The ending is satisfactory, with an anticipated plot twist. Jim Phelps did survive the brutal attack in Prague and is revealed to be the mole in the IMF looking to frame Ethan. The end sequence is masterfully done and is part of the film I honestly didn't really appreciate at first when watching it for the first time, and the film overall has really grown on me. I wouldn't mind revisiting it again, and I'm going to place this in the B tier. Eager to make a sequel, Hong Kong action film director John Woo geared up with Tom Cruise for Mission Impossible 2. And I'd say this is honestly the most forgettable movie in the whole franchise. I've always struggled to sit through this one, where even the jaw-dropping allure of Thandie Newton's beauty can only keep my interest for so long.
Do you mind if I'm on top?
As cliché as it sounds, this film is the definition of style over substance. The plot is extremely weak and overshadowed by unnecessary action sequences just for the sake of it. It's as though a plot was loosely constructed around a bunch of stunt performances just to tie this project together and call it a movie. Story-wise, Ethan Hunt is tasked with recovering a genetically engineered virus before it ends up in the hands of a rogue IMF agent, Sean Ambrose. And in the wrong hands, it's a threat to the world. One complication for Ethan, however, involves his love life, where he falls for the thief Naya, played by Thandie Newton. And yes, this film has a very forced romance plot. She's also the ex-lover of Sean, which tries to make the tension a little more spicy, and to be honest, I just didn't really like this angle. We don't care about this newly established relationship, because it just feels like a one-night stand. Despite the Mission Impossible name, I feel this is just another generic action movie. Admittedly, the stunts did have their moments, especially the motorbike chase sequence towards the end, and I did also appreciate the scene with Ethan breaking into the lab using a ceiling cable, somewhat reminiscent of the first film. Plus, I completely forgot Anthony Hopkins was in this film. But sadly, MI2 is nothing special, without a doubt the weakest entry in the entire franchise, and I'm placing this film in the D tier. Luckily, things pick up slightly in the third film, directed by J.J. Abrams, which I feel improves on some of the ideas that were given to us in MI2, whilst also building its own enigmatic storyline. And returning to the field, things get personal for Ethan Hunt. Chasing down an arms dealer known as Owen Davian, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, I really enjoyed his cold performance without falling into the cliche villain tropes, and it cracked me up seeing a very young Aaron Paul make a cameo in this film. The mission itself revolves around obtaining a world-ending device known as the Rabbit's Foot, and when Ethan gets involved, things get personal with Davian. Making some brutal threats, I appreciate how the film's opening takes the time to establish a loving relationship between Ethan and his fiancée Julia, and their chemistry is not forced, and they appear to be a believable couple, and when interrogated, Davian threatens Julia's life, which almost becomes a promise. And there's some phenomenal tension written into the dialogue with scenes such as the interrogation that I felt elevated this part of the storyline. Despite the positives for the acting and the pacing, I feel the ending is a letdown with no real payoff. The Rabbit's Foot is just another MacGuffin with no real meaning that leaves you with more questions. I did like Benji Dunn's introduction in this film, the comic relief played by Simon Pegg. One actor that really did impress me was Lawrence Fishburne. His harsh dialogue and impeccable line delivery got a good few laughs out of me, and I can see why he went on to play characters like Jack Crawford in the Hannibal series.
Use the ladies' room!
Generally speaking, MI3 is an improvement over the previous film with some enjoyable performances, but I'm gonna place this one in the C tier. After some uncertainty over whether the franchise would make a return, we have 2011's Ghost Protocol. Animation director Brad Bird makes his live-action debut, and up front I'll say this is my personal favourite of the franchise without a doubt. I really appreciate the directing style, looking specifically at how the shots are framed, and I'd arguably say the characters are at their strongest in terms of chemistry, despite the story feeling like the narrative equivalent of everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Compared to the previous installments, the story is much stronger. Ethan Hunt and his team are framed for bombing the Kremlin in Russia, and the US president invokes Ghost Protocol, disavowing the IMF. And Hunt and his team, including new agent William Brandt, must go rogue to clear their names and stop a madman named Hendrix from starting a nuclear war. And it's a fun race against time, travelling to several locations across the globe, including Dubai and then Mumbai, and their mission is to recover a stolen nuclear launch device and prevent Hendrix from using it. But beyond this, Hendrix is a pretty mediocre villain. A lot of the core of what makes this film so enjoyable is based solely around the protagonists and their enjoyable on-screen chemistry. Even with some moments being silly and unexpectedly comedic, there's a lot to appreciate from the writing and the storyline. It successfully blends the high-stakes story with character growth, and according to the trivia for this film, Christopher McQuarrie, who would eventually basically take over the franchise, rewrote the script with Brad Bird, and he helped refine the film, preventing it from feeling messy and unbalanced with its pacing. It was great to see Simon Pegg's character return with a more heavily developed role as a field agent, and I absolutely loved Paula Patton as Jane Carter. I really wish we could have seen more of her beyond this film. Apparently due to scheduling conflicts, she sadly could not return in the sequels, but she made a lasting impression as a capable field agent, and in some scenes, Jeremy Renner stole the show, particularly his emotional delivery when discussing what happened to Ethan's wife Julia, but what happened to her is left ambiguous throughout the film, until the very last scene where it's revealed that she is luckily alive and well, living her best life. I'd say revisiting this film is always a good time for me. The atmosphere, likable characters, and music by Michael Giacchino give it a refreshing tone. Not to mention the memorable stunts performed by Tom Cruise, such as climbing the Burj Khalifa. It is easily an S-tier film and one that I do revisit every few years. Making a lasting impression with his contributions, Christopher McQuarrie returns, but this time as the director and co-writer for Rogue Nation. The IMF is disbanded, and an anti-IMF known as the Syndicate rises in its place. And I felt this angle could have been further explored, but Ethan Hunt takes it upon himself to expose the Syndicate, and he is personally provoked by Solomon Lane, played by Sean Harris, the leading man behind the anti-IMF movement. and I'd honestly say he's one of my new favourite original villains. His performance is unpredictable, which makes things difficult because he's not an easy person to read, and once again, Ethan is fighting to save the world with no support from any government officials. It's great to see the majority of the team back together, with Simon Pegg getting even more screen time as Benji. Luther makes a proper return in this film, making up for a short-lived cameo in Ghost Protocol. Brandt has a brief but important role scattered throughout, and introduced in this film the undercover MI6 agent Ilsa Faust, played by Rebecca Ferguson. What an absolute delight on screen, a very talented actress, and I enjoyed how her loyalty and motivations are left uncertain, especially when working closely with Solomon Lane. And generally speaking, the action sequences are consistently entertaining. I'd recommend checking out the behind the scenes of this film for the underwater vault heist. Even though it's basically Tiny Tom swimming around an aqua donut, the blended usage of practical and CGI made for a very exhilarating sequence. Plus, the ending is very satisfactory, reflective of the first scene featuring Ethan and Lane, and I like how this moment comes full circle. Overall, a very well acted and entertaining story, and I'm going to place this film in the A tier. Where each film had a different director, this one breaks tradition. Christopher McQuarrie returns to direct Fallout. With a much darker tone, this film was my favourite for a very long time, and is still one of my most memorable cinema experiences I've ever had. Its non-stop action was great, and I really enjoyed how certain themes that were placed on hold are revisited once again, most notably Ethan Hunt's relationship with Julia. And in this film, the IMF is in jeopardy once again, following a failed plutonium heist, and an offshoot of the Syndicate from the last film, now known as the Apostles, plans to contaminate a huge selection of the world's water supply, and they plan to do this using nuclear weapons. I guess preventing this from happening is easier said than done. Ethan and the rest of the IMF team are tasked with recovering the stolen plutonium, with Ethan going undercover as a terrorist named John Lark. And it was odd seeing Ethan out of his comfort zone, playing a character amongst people that made him uncomfortable, and the White Widow played by Vanessa Kirby really adds to this, especially with that deliberately false smile she keeps doing. In my opinion, a perfectly cast character that we luckily do see again. Similar to Rogue Nation, it was interesting to see a power struggle emerge between the CIA and the IMF, only this time a new agent is forced onto Ethan Hunt's team. August Walker, played by Henry Cavill. He's your generic, straight-A secret agent, and that's enough to make you suspicious about him. Even with the IMF succeeding at their missions, they are nothing short of dysfunctional, and this guy just did not fit in, so much that he was an obvious double agent working in favour of the terrorists, and he's an unstoppable force that almost feels like a Terminator. He's just that relentless. It was incredible to see Solomon Lane once again, and how Ethan is forced to break him out of a maximum security vehicle, and considering what it took to capture him, this is the last thing he wanted to do. Once again, Sean Harris is a scene stealer for all the right reasons. His dialogue, even when somewhat comedic, is still terrifying.
It's good to see you again, Ethan.
That said, he's a necessary inclusion to the plot, where he's used as a bargaining chip for the IMF to locate the plutonium and stop the nukes from going off. And the entire end sequence works perfectly, doubling down on the edge-of-your-seat action. One moment that I felt cemented the darker tone was the fake-out conclusion. For a moment, it looks as though the team actually fails the mission, which really caught me off guard. I will say it was disappointing that Jeremy Renner did not return as Brandt, because I did really enjoy his chemistry with the other characters, but it did feel as though they'd struggled to integrate him into the plot, with it already being substantial enough. And overall, I just love this film. I think it's a fantastic action movie, and for sure it belongs in the S tier category. Despite being the first of a two-part film entry, as a standalone piece, Dead Reckoning works incredibly well. Yes, it does have a cliffhanger, but it's still an extremely satisfying thrill ride that once again raises the bar for what's possible with the Mission Impossible franchise. And what sets this film apart from the others is the villain being an AI known simply as the Entity. And at times the film feels a little bit more science fiction, which does take you out of the story, where the IMF is tasked with locating a cruciform key, which becomes a race against time against others who are interested, and the first one to acquire the key takes full control of the Entity. Another angle that I really enjoyed about this film revisits Ethan Hunt's past before the MI films, looking at how and why he was given the choice to be an agent in the first place. And a figure from his past becomes a threat, Gabriel, played by Jose Morales, who supposedly works for the entity and therefore wishes to gain its power. And to be honest, I felt as though this point could have been explored a little bit more rather than just writing the character to be a mysterious figure just for the sake of it. And speaking of new characters, Grace, played by Hayley Atwell, was a standout character, a thief who unwillingly gets caught up in the mission. In a sense, I felt as though she was far too similar to Ilsa Faust. That may have been influenced by the actress Rebecca Ferguson wanting to leave the franchise behind, and it's a shame because she was a standout part of the more recent films, but I respect her decision and felt Ilsa's death was a necessary tragedy. Similar to Fallout, I recall the cinema experience for this film being one of the best, especially when experiencing the action scenes for the first time. The motorcycle stunts and the entire train sequence is exceptionally well done, and I will say the film is guilty of being extremely heavy on the exposition, which is not a bad thing, because it does add a lot of detail to the plot and the payoff is definitely worth it. Overall, it's an exhilarating experience that really captured my interest throughout, especially with some returning characters and the unfortunate departure of others. It's up there as one of the best, and I'm going to place this in the A tier. Last up, we have Mission Impossible 8: The Final Reckoning.
He was filming Mission Impossible 8.
So he's okay. So
He's filming the next one.
They're filming the next one, sure.
He's annoyed. He's going, I can't believe they're making more of these films.
I've always wanted to reference that Ricky Gervais skit. Anyway, instead of being titled Dead Reckoning Part 2, The Final Reckoning does reaffirm that this film is the last one in the franchise. But is this actually the end? I genuinely feel this won't be the last, especially with how open the ending is, and the film itself makes the entity its main focus now that Ethan Hunt has the key obtained in the previous film. The mission: stop the entity from infiltrating the world's security systems, where its goal is to launch all the world's nuclear weapons to cause a global apocalypse. Even with a straightforward premise, the journey is a complicated trip down memory lane for Ethan Hunt. And it's funny how basically all of the Mission Impossible films are referenced to at least some loose extent, apart from the second one, so much that we even learn what the rabbit's foot actually is from the third movie. Further context is given to the vault heist from the first film, and it's great to see these moments written into the plot organically, rather than just being shoehorned in as member berries. Ethan's plan is to infiltrate the sunken submarine, shown at the beginning of Dead Reckoning, obtain the entity's original source code, and use a device made by Luther to capture and store the artificial intelligence rather than destroy it. Speaking of, it was so sad to lose Luther in this film, but I suppose it makes sense with the return of Gabriel seeking revenge, but his death was sad nonetheless. And with other characters, it was great to have Pon Clementif brought back from the previous film, now as an ally, the French assassin named Paris. Tramel Tillman plays a supporting role as a submarine captain, helping Ethan get to the Russian sub-wreckage. Many will know this actor from Severance, playing Mr. Milchik, and he's slowly becoming one of my favourite actors. He's extremely charismatic, and I really like how this works when playing both a friend or foe. I will say that when compared to the previous films, some sequences do feel very drawn out, with the runtime being a whopping 2 hours and 50 minutes. The exposition is very heavy in the first half with minimal action scenes. Even with a lot of build-up, however, I will say the payoff is worth it, but still could have been better. The entire underwater sequence of Ethan exploring the Russian submarine felt very bland and colourless. A few shots of the deceased crew and other remnants tried to make up for this, but I found the whole section elongated and very dull. But despite this, you can't argue with Tom Cruise's dedication to the physical stunt performances. He goes above and beyond, especially in the latter half during the airplane chase sequence, which has a very satisfactory demise for a certain someone. Despite any gripes I may have, the film is a fond farewell to the franchise. It's not perfect by any means, but it does remain memorable and has many enjoyable moments. Part of me doesn't even want this to be the end because I love the concept of these films and I just want something better to go out on an even higher high, but I think it's fair to let a franchise end on a mostly positive note rather than risk ruining it, and perhaps the Mission Impossible movies have run their course and this is a sign of good things coming to an end. With this film, I'm going to place it in the B tier. Before we wrap up this video, I thought we'd take a look at all of the Blu-ray sets I own for Mission Impossible. So this is the Extreme Blu-ray trilogy, which of course has the first 3 Mission Impossible movies. The triple play edition of Ghost Protocol. Rogue Nation, which has one of my favourite movie posters from the Mission Impossible franchise. And of course there we have the infamous sequence where Tom Cruise was clinging onto an airplane. Really fascinating behind the scenes content for this film in particular. Mission Impossible 6 Fallout, which is a 2-disc Blu-ray set which has a load of extra bonus features on the second disc. Removing the slipcover, there is the inside contents. Last up we have Dead Reckoning Part 1. Yeah, interesting how the film was later rebranded to just Dead Reckoning, which I think is more suitable, and then obviously having Part 2 as The Final Reckoning. I think the Part 1, Part 2 thing was a little bit silly, but nonetheless, there are the 2 discs, and I even kept my original cinema ticket from when I went and saw this film. That's going to do it for my collection overview and movie discussion looking at all 8 Mission Impossible movies. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, be sure to leave me a like down below. Let me know in the comments how you would rank these movies. As ever, I love hearing your thoughts and opinions. And for more content, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, DVD Review Studios.
Are you threatening me?